But if you really want to make the big money, it's in flipping apartment buildings. And a lot of people don't even talk about that. What's up, fruitful investors? In today's video, it's all about multifamily properties. Now, a question I always get asked is, should I buy a smaller multifamily or should I jump right into the big buildings? Both have their pros and cons. In this video, I'm gonna go over the pros and cons to each type to help you make a decision on which type of multifamily property you should be buying to fit your goals specifically. Buying real estate is all about specializing in buying the right type of real estate to help you achieve your goals, whatever they are. So, starting with smaller types of multifamily. These are your duplex, triplex, fourplex, and maybe even fiveplex. Some lenders will still consider a fiveplex a smaller residential multifamily type of property. And we'll get into that in just a second. So, the 1 to 4, maybe 1 to 5 types of units, the pros to these types of properties is that they're less expensive, which is why they're more common and more people tend to own these types of properties, especially duplexes and triplexes and maybe even fourplexes. These are much more attainable than the big giant buildings where here in Kitchener-Waterloo, they're easily over $1 million. If you want a 6plex or an 8plex or a 10plex, you're looking at least between $1 to $1.5 million. So for a lot of people, that is not attainable. Okay, so the other pro to the smaller types of multifamily properties is that there are less tenants to manage. So when you only have 2 or 3 tenants, it's much more easy to manage and more suited to the beginner multifamily investor, okay? So the last pro that I have on here is that there are less repairs. When you have less tenants living in your property, you have less maintenance to worry about. Also, you're dealing with more residential type properties. So these properties are likely gonna have a furnace rather than a boiler system, which we'll get into when we get into the bigger multifamilies. There also aren't elevators and all these types of things. So there are less repairs to be made and less costly. So much lower on the cost end when renovating or fixing these types of properties, okay? So the con to these types of properties, one of the biggest cons that I can think of is that it is based on residential financing. So this is a big problem for most people, which is where I'm in right now. When you have a number of properties, it is much harder to get residential financing, and 5 units and below to the banks is still considered a residential loan, a residential mortgage, and it's very hard to qualify for these types of properties when you start owning more and more real estate. No matter how well your properties are cash flowing, your portfolio is doing, if you have a lot of these types of properties, you're gonna max out likely between 4, 5, 6 properties. The bank is gonna say no more mortgages for you, no matter how well your business is doing. And 5 units and below is residential mortgage financing, which is based, really, the mortgages are based on you the applicant. So your credit rating, how much money do you make, etc., etc. Whereas when you get into the 6 and above units, which we'll get to in a second, this is commercial financing, and the focus totally changes off of you and onto the property first. How well is this property cash flowing? How well has the building been performing in the past couple years? That's the number one focus with commercial loans. Then it's on you, your income, your credit score, etc., etc. Much less important with the bigger buildings. But with the 5 units and down, it is still the same as buying a single family property. That's the way the banks look at it. It's the same exact thing, same process to go through. So one of the other cons with smaller multifamily properties is that they likely most of the time aren't purpose built, and my marker is dying out, which seems to always happen on these videos. They are not purpose built. So you often see these types of properties in the downtown cores where it used to be a big century home, a century old home, and they converted it and chopped it all up into a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex or even a fiveplex. You see it all the time. And some people like these types of properties. Some people I know specialize in these types of properties. But for me personally, I find that as a big con because the structure's been damaged so much over the years. Who knows what walls have been taken out, and they're just very choppy, and they don't seem to make sense or flow. The biggest con to this as well, because they're not purpose built, is that you're going to attract a lower quality tenant. Now, the other con to these types of smaller multifamily properties is that there are less tenants living in them. So yeah, they're easier to handle and easier to manage because there's only 2 or 3 tenants, but you have a lower amount of income coming under one roof. Now, a lot of multifamily investors will see that as a negative. And also on top of that, these types of chopped up properties will attract lower quality tenants because they're not open and spacious and modern. They're usually older types of properties, like I said, century homes, and they just attract that lower quality tenant. You'll see the tenants on benefits or pensions or retired or on disability. I'm not saying these types of tenants are horrible people. They're not. It's just you tend to run into more problems with those types of tenants. It's just the way it is. It might not be politically correct for me to say that, but you know what? This is a business. I'm here to tell you all the information. Those types of tenants tend to come with more baggage and more headaches. It's just the way it is. I'm not saying don't rent to them. It's just the truth. It's just the way it is. So you have to know the facts before getting into these types of properties. Now, let's get into the bigger buildings. We've covered the smaller types of properties, the pros and cons. Let's get into the bigger buildings. So the pros to these types of properties is that there's more tenants under one roof. We're getting into 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 tenants, 12 apartments under one building. So you're kind of maximizing the cash flow and the tenant footprint under one building. And a lot of multifamily investors really like that. And what comes with that is more cash flow. When you have more tenants paying you rent under one roof, you tend to have more cash flow. And the bigger buildings tend to come with more money and more income. Okay. So the third sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. So if you see me keep looking at these, that's what I'm looking at. And one of the biggest pros to me in big multifamily is that there is big money to be made. Again, you probably can't see that. I'm gonna have to switch markers. So one of the biggest pros I love about these properties is that it's big money. You can make big money in multifamily. If you think you can make money flipping single family homes, that's great. You can make a ton of money doing that. I do that all the time. But if you really want to make the big money, it's in flipping apartment buildings. And a lot of people don't even talk about that because it's kind of weird to think about flipping an apartment building, but that is where the big money is made. If you see on my videos when I talk about multifamily and how to raise the value of an apartment building, you can see how easily and how quickly you can make a ton of money in multifamily real estate. I'm talking $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year in a multifamily property. So it's pretty crazy how much money you can make once you start realizing the business aspect, which we're going to get to in a second. The next big pro for the big multifamily is that they are purpose built. So unlike the other ones where I said, you know, they're choppy, it used to be a single family home chopped up into 2 or 3 or 4 units. The biggest pro to big multifamily is that they're purpose built. It was meant to be built that way. They're big concrete structures. Like I said, they're open. They were thought out. You know, the floor plans were thought out. They were meant to be a certain way. And this is why I personally like them. And because they're because they're purpose built, they are built to last. They are strong buildings. They tend to be built properly, and purpose built definitely comes with a premium. So these properties are going to cost a lot more, which is why they're in the millions plus here in Kitchener-Waterloo. I keep saying the biggest, but the next biggest pro, you see I love multifamily, the big multifamily much more. But the biggest pro is commercial financing. So as I said before, much easier to get financing in this world should you have the money to buy a property. If you have the 20% down, 30% down, whatever they're asking of you, whatever the mortgage lender is wanting from you, you can most likely get financing on these types of properties. If you can prove that you're sophisticated, that you have a sophisticated past, that you can show that you own properties and they're doing well, and you can prove that this building is going to cash flow on day one, what your plans are, how you're going to increase the rent, it is much, much easier to get financing on these buildings, believe it or not. Even though it's much more business oriented, you got to be way more educated in this space. It is actually much easier to get financing, which is why a lot of people love to just go to the big buildings right away, 6 units or more. But we're talking about all positive stuff here. Let's get into the cons of multifamily property. One of the obvious ones is that it's much more expensive. Like I said, easily over the $1 million range here in Kitchener-Waterloo if you want to get a true purpose-built, large commercial multifamily building. The next con, sorry, I'm looking at my notes here, is that it is much more intense business. So as I said, you have to be much more sophisticated, because if you make mistakes in this world, you can go bankrupt very, very quick. The money you can lose in these types of properties is very real. I have to say that straight up. It is a big commitment and risk to be investing in these big buildings if you don't know what you're doing. And a lot of people have no idea what they're doing when they're investing in these types of properties. When you get into the commercial space, the commercial multifamily, it is all about numbers and finances and how to read spreadsheets and financial statements. You must be very, very educated when you're investing in these types of properties. The next con, so I just kind of said it, you need to be very educated. Now, there's a ton of videos on my channel talking about how to invest in multifamily buildings, how to raise the value, how to sell these buildings quickly when it comes time to sell them. And the information I'm giving you on these videos is really going to set you apart from like 99% of the multifamily investors out there. Because I'm a realtor specializing with real estate investors specifically, I know exactly what they're looking for. I've done so many deals. I just do this in my sleep. But a lot of you watching these videos are getting into your first, third, fourth, or fifth property or less. So this is still new territory for you. And like I said, big multifamily building is much more serious. You can lose a ton of money, but again, you can also make a ton of money as well. Now, the last con for the big buildings is that there are usually much more expensive repairs. Okay, so instead of the furnaces like you're doing in a duplex, triplex, fourplex, it's usually just a furnace, the same as our single family homes. Those are easy to fix, they're easy to repair. In multifamily world, you're dealing with complex boiler systems or elevators or common area staircases, like roofs, the flat roofs. Oh man, the flat roofs are the worst and most expensive repair out of all of them, likely. Maybe not for the elevators, but there's big repairs when you're dealing with purpose-built, large multifamily buildings. But again, like I said, there's a ton of money to be made. So take what I've said, the pros and cons of each type of multifamily, and figure out which type is best for you, your risk level, your goals that you're trying to achieve in real estate, and figure out which one you should do. Personally, I like the big multifamily and single family too. So single family for me is very boring. It's basic, it's predictable. It's my bread and butter for my real estate business or empire income. And now I'm jumping to the big multifamily buildings. I'm skipping right over the small triplex, fourplex. I don't like those properties at all. Personally for me, duplexes I love a lot because I can take a single family property, which is what I know very well. That's where my expertise lies. I can split it up into a duplex. It's still single family tenant profile, so it fits for me. But I'll skip right over the triplex, fourplex, fiveplex, and those choppy homes, and I'll skip right over to the purpose-built building. But that's because I have a very business-oriented mindset. That's my philosophy on real estate, just straight business. So this fits perfectly for my personality type and my risk level and what I like to do the most. So that's the video. If you learned anything, please click like right below to get access to my 12 free video series where I teach you how to invest in real estate from A to Z and everything in between. You can get access to those free videos by clicking on the link right below in the description. And to find out more about my real estate investing apprenticeship program, about how you can partner with me and I can be your one-on-one coach, you can find out more about that right about here. I will see you in the next video.